Picture a young drummer sitting alone in a dark room. Sweat trickles down his forehead as his fingers move at breakneck speed across the drum set. It's almost midnight at Schaffer Conservatory, and Andrew is obsessed with a dream, becoming one of the greats in history. Not just any musician, one whose name endures, whose legacy transcends. Schaffer Conservatory isn't just a music school. It's a battlefield where only the exceptional survive. And nobody embodies this philosophy more intensely than Terence Fletcher, the director of the conservatory's most prestigious jazz orchestra. Fletcher doesn't seek to train competent musicians. He's looking to discover geniuses. His method resembles that of a blacksmith, heating the metal until it nearly breaks, hammering it repeatedly and cooling it abruptly, all to create something that withstands the test of time. The first time Fletcher saw Andrew, he recognized something. It wasn't talent, it was hunger, a primal obsession that resonated with his own. The conservatory represents a peculiar microcosm where time is measured in measures. The outside world, friends, family, relationships, exists in a parallel dimension that gradually fades away. Andrew knew this when he accepted the position of alternate drummer in Fletcher's band. What he didn't know was the price he would pay. Obsession has a cost, and Andrew was willing to pay it. Every night he practiced until his fingers bled, plunging his hands into buckets of ice just to continue hours later. While his peers slept, he studied recordings of Buddy Rich and Joe Jones, memorizing every nuance, every technique. The first time Fletcher humiliated Andrew in front of the entire band, something changed in the young man. Tears welled up, but behind them was determination. Fletcher had thrown a chair against the wall, shouted insults, and slapped Andrew for losing tempo. For any reasonable person, that would have been enough to quit. But Andrew wasn't reasonable. He was obsessed. There's a fundamental difference between being good and being great. While Fletcher built his legacy by psychologically destroying his students, Andrew built his by sacrificing everything else. His budding relationship with Nicole, the girl from the movie theater, became another victim of his obsession. In his mind, he had made a simple calculation: Nicole or the drums. And the drums won. His relationship with his father followed a similar pattern. Jim Naiman was a high school teacher, a man of modest aspirations who never truly understood the magnitude of his son's ambition. During a family dinner, when everyone was celebrating his cousin's athletic achievements, Andrew exploded. "I'd rather die at 34, alone and alcoholic like Charlie Parker, but being one of the best in history than live to 90 with nobody knowing who I was." The silence that followed was deafening. His father looked at him with a mixture of concern and disappointment. It wasn't the first time Andrew had prioritized recognition over human connection. Obsession is a cruel master. It convinces you that today's sacrifice will bring tomorrow's glory. His philosophy was based on an anecdote about Charlie Parker. As a young man, he made a mistake during a performance, and Joe Jones threw a cymbal at his head, publicly humiliating him. That night, Parker vowed never to make a mistake again. A year later, he became one of the most revolutionary saxophonists in history. "There are no two more harmful words in the language than good job," Fletcher would explain. "They're words that kill ambition." Parker's anecdote had become his personal gospel, a justification for his methods. But what Fletcher never mentioned was the rest of the story. Parker struggling with devastating addictions, his body collapsing at 34, his genius consumed by the very demons that drove him. Fletcher had built an entire pedagogical philosophy around a selectively edited myth. During a particularly brutal session, Fletcher made 3 drummers compete for the main position for more than 5 hours without a break. When Andrew finally achieved the perfect tempo, with bleeding hands and a face soaked in sweat and tears, Fletcher simply said, "Finally, no congratulations, just a brief acknowledgement that the minimum standard had been met." Fletcher recognized that his treatment was toxic, but he justified it as a necessary evil. The relationship between Fletcher and Andrew was a macabre dance, one constantly pushing, the other resisting and adapting. Fletcher would promote Andrew to principal drummer, only to demote him the next day. He would give him a crucial opportunity in a competition, only to sabotage it by changing the repertoire without warning. And yet, Andrew always came back for more. The breaking point came during a crucial festival. Andrew, desperate to arrive on time after a setback, suffered a car accident. Any rational person would have sought immediate medical attention. Andrew, bloodied and dazed, ran to the stage and took his place at the drums. The disaster that followed was catastrophic. Unable to keep rhythm due to his injuries, Andrew was humiliated in front of judges and audience. But what came next was even worse. In a fit of rage, he lunged at Fletcher, physically attacking him in front of everyone. That moment marked the apparent end of his musical career. Andrew left the conservatory, Fletcher was fired after an investigation into his abusive methods, and both seemed destined to become footnotes in each other's history. Months later, fate reunited them at a jazz club where Fletcher now played piano. During an apparently cordial conversation, Fletcher invited Andrew to play at a prestigious jazz festival. What Andrew didn't know was that Fletcher had planned his ultimate revenge. He led Andrew to believe they would play familiar pieces, but upon reaching the stage, he announced a repertoire unknown to him. It was a trap designed to publicly humiliate Andrew, to expose him as a fraud in front of industry professionals. And it worked. For a few minutes. What Fletcher didn't anticipate was Andrew's response. Instead of accepting the humiliation and retreating, Andrew returned to the stage. Without asking permission, he interrupted Fletcher and began playing Caravan at his own tempo. The band followed, and Fletcher, initially furious, had no choice but to adapt. What followed was extraordinary, a drum solo of such intensity that it transformed humiliation into triumph. And as he played, something changed in Fletcher. Fury gave way to admiration. For the first time, he wasn't facing a student trying to please him, but an artist who had transcended the need for approval. A cymbal fell to the floor during the frenzied solo. At any other time, this would have been an unforgivable catastrophe, a mistake Fletcher would have punished with public humiliation. But instead of becoming enraged, Fletcher picked up the cymbal and placed it back on its stand. That simple gesture contained an entire revolution. The tyrant recognizing an equal, the master bowing to the work. The drums were no longer an instrument. They had become an extension of Andrew himself. Each hit resonated with years of suffering, rejection, and obsession. Sweat soaked his shirt, blood stained the drum heads, but none of that mattered. Andrew had found that mystical state all artists pursue, the moment when creator and creation merge into a single entity. In that moment, their eyes met. Fletcher smiled slightly, and Andrew returned the smile. Two obsessives who finally found what they were looking for in each other. That's the paradoxical power of obsession. It can destroy almost everything in its path, but sometimes, just sometimes, it creates moments that justify its terrible cost. Andrew had proven his worth, had achieved the excellence he sought, but at what price? And Fletcher, though he had finally found his Charlie Parker, how many lives had he destroyed in the process? Andrew's life after that night would inevitably be different. Perhaps he would pursue a brilliant career, becoming a jazz legend as he so longed for. Or perhaps the intensity of that experience would consume him completely, turning him into another tragic statistic like his idol Charlie Parker. Fletcher would probably continue searching for the next promise, the next rough diamond he could polish with his ruthless methods. The true tragedy is that both firmly believed in a false dilemma. That greatness can only emerge from suffering. That genius requires total sacrifice. Not for a moment did they consider that perhaps another path could exist, one where excellence was the result of passion, nurtured with wisdom, not cruelty. Because at its core, the story of Andrew and Fletcher is also the story of the toxic relationship our society has with excellence. We admire geniuses, glorify their achievements, but rarely do we stop to consider the human cost behind them. We accept the romantic narrative of the tortured artist, the athlete who sacrifices everything, the entrepreneur who abandons any personal life for the sake of success. That narrative perpetuates itself in every conservatory, in every elite academy, in every company that celebrates sleepless nights and sacrificed relationships as badges of honor. And while we applaud those who survive this ruthless system, we rarely ask about the countless talents crushed along the way.